Thousands of years ago, an avian alien race left its homeworld and populated the desolate, barren worlds in the outer rim of the galaxy. Most of the great races kind of just saw them as backwards and insignificant. And during the conflict between the Lazaks and the Mahact, a couple of the Mahact started forcing these Shakrai, as they were called, to fight each other. So, they kind of make armies out of these Shakrai and force them to fight on their behalf. Until a Lazak's warlord by the name of Harkor Ilban Tal defeated these warlords, and the Shakrai became indebted to the Lazaks. So what the Shakrai did was promise sort of a tithe or a pledge that they would send a certain number of their population to aid in the defense and support of the Lazaks in the future. So the Lazaks took these chosen Shakrai and returned them to their original homeworld, which at the time nobody was living in, or probably very few people, and they formed what is now called the Argent Flight. So these people were trained to fight for and defend the interests of the Lazaks. But in order to keep them a secret, the Lazaks erased all the official records of the existence of the homeworlds. As far as I can glean, it seems like the system is somewhere in or near Shalari territory. So this is the Ghosts of Creus. So kind of in that region of space, which has long been avoided by a lot of space travelers. Now, during the Twilight Wars, the great races were still largely unaware of the existence of the Argent Flight, because the Argent Flight's missions still tended to stay in the shadows. So they were dealing with Mahawked sleeper agents and other threats, kind of secret threats to the Lazaks Empire. So I guess you could kind of say maybe they were acting in part like the CIA for the Lazaks, or special forces. But when the Lazaks fell, the existence of the Argent Flight and their home system still remained a secret. But the Argent Flight have recently made themselves known, and so if you have the expansion Prophecy of Kings, this is where they're introduced. They weren't actually in the original base game of Twilight Imperium 4. So they've recently brought themselves forward to contend for the seat of the new rulers of the galaxy, perhaps seeing that their role as the defenders of the Lazaks entitles them to this position. The Argent Flight home system is very interesting. It centers around a neutron star named Forus, and there's a gas giant by the name of Hasid. And between Forus and Hasid, there is a narrow orbit of 3 small planets called Valk, Avar, and Elir. What most interesting about this system is that in this orbit of those 3 planets, there is a breathable torus or donut shape of breathable air called the ethereal gas torus. And so all of these planets kind of exist within a single atmosphere. And it's not just that, like even within this torus, there's the 3 planets, but there's also kind of large boulders or asteroids floating around. There's these giant trees that have now been genetically engineered to produce fruit. So you kind of have flocks or groups of Argent Flight now that kind of just live throughout this torus, although the populations are kind of focused on the planets. The government of the Argent Flight is a confederation. Each of the flocks has its own leader, which represents them in a group government called the Murmuration. And I'm actually just getting word right now that the leader of the Murmuration would like to share a word.
Greetings. I feel it is my duty to say a few words about the glories of industry and technology. There are those among us who would silence our factories, shut down our mills, and grind our highways to a halt. Yea, verily, today the very fiber of our industrialization is under attack from a small, subversive group of namby-pamby conservationists. These weirdos would stop the march of progress for the sake of a few insignificant animals.
All right, a very controversial statement by the leader of the Murmuration. So the home system, as fascinating as it is cosmologically, it's not necessarily the most bounteous planets in the galaxy. So if we take a look at them, we have Vok, which is kind of the mining planet. It's kind of where they do a lot of the mining and industry. There's Avar, which is there's caverns within it, so most of the population lives on Avar. And Ilir is a planet covered in deep oceans with these kind of floating cities on it, and these are actually where the Murmuration meet. So I guess you could say that's the government planet. The value of these planets is somewhat poor, as is the case. This is the only other 3-planet system in the game, home system in the game, besides the Hakan home system, which also has kind of poor desert worlds on it. So each individual planet obviously doesn't have a lot going for it. But even if you add the totals together, you're still only looking at a total production of 3 and a total influence of 3. So it's kind of a low balance of either one. So not the greatest system to have dropped the Argent Flight off in.
Good grief, I've been hornswoggled.
But besides that, they have some really interesting abilities. So let's just take a quick look at what they have in terms of game mechanics. We'll start with their starting units. They start only with 1 carrier, which I know a lot of you are out there thinking, oh, just 1 carrier, that sucks. But they have a way around this, which we'll get to soon. They start with 2 destroyers, which is going to be important. 2 fighters, 5 infantry, so a good fighting force to start off. A space dock, and a PDS. Oh, one thing I should say here too. 3-planet system, 4 as it is. If you want to really defend a home world, or a home system, you can put 2 PDS per planet, so you can basically put them all in there. I don't know if that's ever really going to be the best thing to do, but highly defendable. What's really interesting about them in the starting phase, the beginning of the game, is they actually have a choice of which technologies they want. So the starting technology, they have a list of 3 technologies, and they get to choose which 2 they'd like to start with. So that's Neural Motivator, Sarwing Tools, and Plasma Scoring. So I guess if you want to go to that previously mentioned PDS defense strategy, Plasma Scoring is always nice, although honestly, Neural Motivator is brilliant. I don't know why you'd never choose that one, but maybe somebody else can give me some insight in the comments. So, pretty good start, starting with 2 technologies, lots of infantry. So again, the only handicap you may see in there is the 1 carrier, but boy, oh boy, do they have a way to deal with that. Alright, but first, let's talk about their faction abilities. So the Argent Flight have an ability called Zeal, which has kind of a good element and a bad element to it. The good element is, when they cast at least 1 vote, they get an additional vote for every player in the game, including themselves. But the downside of Zeal is that they always vote first. I've seen people talk online where they seem to think that the first couple votes determines how the vote's going to go. That has not been my experience, unless you know for sure that you can outvote the people who are voting last, like the speaker. Because it's the idea is voting last, you already know what you have to beat. You already know, like if it's the first agenda, and the votes are super high and you know you can't beat it, you don't have to waste any votes. You can just save everything for the next agenda. So voting first, you don't know what you're getting into. So you might be spending votes that are just going to be wasted. Whereas if you're the last vote, you know how much you need to spend and if it's even worth spending. So kind of, in my opinion, that's a bit of a holdback for the Argent Flight politically, is that they always need to vote first. Their other ability is called Raid Formation. When 1 or more of your units use Anti-Fighter Barrage, for each hit produced in excess of your opponent's fighters, choose one of your opponent's ships that has sustained damage to become damaged. So this is an ability that strengthens the use of their destroyers, and you're going to notice this is a very heavy theme with the Argent Flight. They have, hands down, the best destroyers in the game, and a lot of their abilities are going to be focused on using them effectively. So in this case, if you're fighting against a fleet that has like Dreadnoughts or War Suns or flagships in it, when you do your Anti-Fighter Barrage, okay, you can just damage them right out of the gate. And if you have direct hits, there they go, before they even, really get to do anything. So that's a pretty neat ability. But what's most interesting is if you look at their Strike Wing Alpha 1, and this is their starting destroyer. And this is why I was saying it's not that big a deal that they're only starting with one carrier, because this is the only destroyer in the game that has capacity. So it does have a slightly better combat than other destroyers. Its starting anti-fighter barrage is the same, but its combat, it hits on an 8 instead of a 9. And you can see by the arrow that's only going to improve when you upgrade it. But the fact it has capacity and a move 2 means right at the beginning of the game you can start stretching out into farther systems than a lot of other people can go. And even though they're only carrying one each, destroyers are pretty cheap. And because so many of your abilities are based on destroyers, you're probably going to want fleets of destroyers anyway. So if they're each carrying one guy, you might have a fleet of 4 or 5 destroyers that's just carrying 4 or 5 guys, which is what you'd be getting with the carrier anyway, with better combat ability. So I really like their destroyers. In fact, that's possibly my favorite part of this faction is their destroyers. I get very excited about it. All right. So the starting units, pretty good. Lots of infantry. Starting techs, great because they have choices. Faction technologies. So we've talked how they have their Strike Wing Alphas. So one of their abilities, obviously, is the upgrade of that, the Strike Wing Alpha 2. And that is, when this unit uses anti-fighter barrage, each result of 9 or 10 also destroys one of your opponent's infantry in the space area of the active system. So that would mean infantry that are being carried, like on a carrier or other ship with capacity, not infantry on planets. But that's fantastic. If you're holding off an invading force, they're flying into your space to take a planet, you could just kill off their infantry. Even if you lose the fight, you might be able to just kill off their infantry so they can't land. And they also have that combat increased to 7. So at this point, they're almost as good as, they are as good as a standard cruiser at this point for combat. Great anti-fighter barrage. So pretty fantastic little ships, and store's dirt cheap, one resource apiece. So I really like that. Their other faction technology is the Aries Hololattice. Other players cannot move ships through systems that contain your structures, and structures would be PDSs and space docks. Each planet that contains one or more of your structures gains the Production 1 ability as if it were a unit. So even if you have... that's really great for... I didn't think about this. This is probably a good thing with the 3 planets in their home system, is that if you have the Aries Hololattice, each of your planet will have Production 1. Your one planet will have a space dock on it, but the other 2 planets still have Production 1. So that's pretty great ability. Costs 1 yellow tech as a prerequisite to order that. But that's pretty cool ability. And if you have a PDS and the system, ships can't fly through. Even if you don't have a fleet to protect yourself, as long as you have a space dock or a structure there, with the Hololattice, people cannot fly through. So pretty easy to defend your inner systems. All right, let's take a look what else we got here. We've got the Quetzalcoatl. This is their flagship. Other players cannot use space cannon against your ships in this system. So one of the things I really like about the Argent Flight is the theme, because they're portrayed as birds of prey, and the X-Jaw are basically space turtles, and the Nalu are snakes. So it's really neat. The Argent Flight has a lot of abilities that seem to counter their strengths. And in this case, other players cannot use space cannon against your ships in this system. Well, the Argent Flight flagship pretty much negates one of the X-Jaw turtles' best defense mechanisms, is they have just a lot of space cannons. Their flagship, their mechs, so you're basically negating one of their best defense mechanisms. You'll be able to just crack that shell from the X-Jaw right out of the get-go. And then aside from the Quetzalcoatl, the Nalu, the snake people, are pretty heavy on their fighters. And with all the Argent Flight destroyer abilities, it's just they can just rip through any Nalu fighter screens. So we're very well equipped to deal with the turtles and the snakes, just like a real eagle would be. All right, next is the Aries Sentinel. So this is the Argent Flight's mech. And it has the ability that this unit does not count against capacity if it is being transported, or, and there's a typo here, or if it is in a space area. with one or more of your ships that have capacity values. So that's absolutely wonderful. So your destroyer, again, only carries 1 infantry, but it can carry any number of mechs, and it doesn't count against it. So you can still have 1 destroyer flying around with, like 4 guys, as long as only one of them is an infantry and the rest are mechs. So that's pretty great. All right, let's take a look at their leaders. So they have their agent, Trilassa on Myrick. When a player produces ground forces in a system, you may exhaust this card. That player may place those units on any planets they control in that system and any adjacent systems. So when you're creating at your space dock, you don't need to put the infantry on the planet with space dock. You can spread them out, as long as you're in that system or an adjacent one. So good way to just get your infantry out to the front line so you don't have to keep flying back to pick people up with your destroyers, for example. Okay, their commander is Trakon on Zulok, Strike Wing Commander. So again, every faction has its unique unlock for the commander. Have 6 units that have anti-fighter barrage, space cannon, or bombardment on the game board. So it's any combination of destroyers, dreadnoughts, PDS. So you have 3 just at the start of the game that tick those boxes. Alright, so once you unlock that, you get the ability, when 1 or more of your units make a roll for a unit ability, you may choose one of those units to roll 1 additional die. So you could roll, for an example, an extra die for your anti-fighter barrage. I think as far as commander abilities go, I don't think this one's super powerful, but I don't think it matters. They have so many strong abilities, military abilities. I don't think that's really much of an issue. Alright, so let's take a look at the hero, Myrick on Sisiri. And just the standard score 3 objectives to unlock the hero. And this is an action. Move any number of your ships from any system to any number of other systems that contain one of your command tokens and no other player's ships. Then purge this card. So this is just a way to move a lot of your fleets out to your front lines, and they are going to be locked down. So this might be something you want to do like the very end of the round, so the next round you have this big fleet ready to go. Again, as far as a lot of the hero abilities go, it's not fantastic. But again, for the sake of game balance, if you're really good in one area, they're probably really weak in another one. I would say my favorite of these 3 leaders is possibly just the agent, which you get to use once per round right from the beginning of the game. Just again, so you're not always having to fly back to pick up infantry. So with your destroyers with capacity, you can fly out fairly. You can get your guys out to Mechatol fairly quickly if you wanted to. And the last feature of the Argent Flight we're going to look at is the Strike Wing Ambuscade. So this is their unique promissory note. When 1 or more of your units make a roll for a unit ability, choose one of those units to roll 1 additional die, then return this card to the Argent player. I don't know if that's going to be a super demand promissory note. Again, with the Argent Flight's destroyer fleets, I think you're going to be alright. And again, just to get things finished, just appreciate if everybody stands for the Argent Flight anthem.
You are all weirdos! Ugh.